Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so excited to have you join us to talk about this important topic. This is actually the first in a series of presentations and workshops that Portico Financial Aid team will be hosting in the next few weeks and months to help explain, understand, think about how to respond to the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or the various other names that we'll say for it, OB3 calling it for short. But the new OB3 legislation and its impact on financial aid operations and systems. Today, we're going to focus on a high-level discussion of how OB3 may impact FA operations and how you all and your teams and your schools can best prepare. My name is Mark Fuller. I'll be joined shortly here by my expert colleagues from the Portico Financial Aid and Managed Services and Product Software teams. We received many questions from all of you. We're going to answer a few of those questions just as part of the presentation here today. We drew out a few of them. There were many repeat questions on similar areas. We're going to answer some of those questions in the presentation. We've also created an OBBBA resource hub, and that includes essentially an information center about everything OB3. Key details, what do you need to know? We'll be adding kind of blogs and guides and key tips in the next few weeks as well, so stay tuned for that. So without further ado, I wanted to mention that Portico has truly an unparalleled team of financial aid experts and many dozens of FA staff members who with decades of experience who last year helped process, I think it was well over $1 billion in aid. But leading our discussion today will be some of my colleagues here. Let's maybe briefly go around the room and do a quick introduction. Karen, do you want to start?
I will. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Martin Brown. I am the Senior Director of Professional Services here at Portico. I have 11 years of financial aid experience. Of that, I was also an Executive Director, CEO of a small college in Florida for almost 5 years. And then I came to Portico and had been working with them for many years prior to that, and very excited to be here. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nan Murray. I am the Financial Aid Product Manager here. I have approximately 8 years of experience in financial aid, working for higher ed at different universities. And now I'm a part of the design, improvement, and architecture section of the SaaS that you interact with every day.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Armando Rios, Director of Financial Aid Processing. I have about 18 years experience in school operations, and we want to welcome you once again. Thank you.
All right. So let's take a look at the agenda just for our session here today. We're going to begin with kind of a recap. Many of you maybe already have some of the key details of the new changes and regulatory updates, but a bit of a high-level recap of what is happening with OB3. We'll talk a little bit about how these policy changes can break operations, right? Where is the risk here for all of our teams and all of our schools? And then we'll walk through some of the different considerations on the ground related to changes, loan limits, grandfathering, loan proration, other topics as well. We'll talk then also about what you can do now, how you can prepare, and then looking to the future, how will our software, the Portico Financial Aid software, how will that support OB3 and the different changes to financial aid? And then beyond that, wrap up with how you can learn more and maybe some next steps. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Karen. Maybe give us that 30,000 foot view of what's going on.
Thank you, Mark. We talked about OBBBA and decided we're going to call it OB3. And we have seen some other people in the industry calling it OB3 too, because it's a tongue twister to say it otherwise. OB3 was signed into law July 4, 2025. While enactment has already occurred, many of the most operationally significant provisions won't take effect until July 1st, 2026, and in some instances even later. It's important to emphasize that we're still in a transitional phase. Statutory language gives us the framework, but regulatory guidance from the Department of Ed is still forthcoming in several areas. That means some implementation details remain unclear, and we should anticipate additional clarification over the coming months, because I'm sure you know the comment period is still open to the public. For those of you who are members of NASFA, you may have noticed that NASFA's own implementation checklist that they're making, which are really great for all of us to use, they're based on draft regulatory text and are subject to change pending the final regulatory text, which is supposed to be by July 1st, hopefully sooner than that. For today's discussion, I want to focus on two things. First, we definitely want to know, based on what we definitely know based on the statute as written. And second, where financial aid operations are most likely to experience strain or disruption early in this implementation cycle. Not every provision will affect institutions in the same way, right? Some changes are mechanical and procedural, things that you do day to day. Others will require policy interpretation, your own policy interpretation, systems reconfiguration, and potentially significant workflow redesign. We also need to acknowledge that several components will ultimately depend on the forthcoming education department guidance and your own institutional policy choices. In other words, compliance will not be purely technical. It'll involve judgment calls, coordination across departments, and strategic decision-making at the campus level. The goal for this session is not speculation, but preparation. We are identifying pressure points now so institutions can begin scenario planning before formal guidance is finalized before the July 1 date. So now let's look at the legislation at a glance. This slide highlights the structural areas of change that will most directly affect financial aid administration: Pell grant provisions, federal loan programs, repayment structures, the introduction of workforce Pell, new loan caps for graduate and professional programs, an end to Grad PLUS loans, and a new way to show whether programs meet the accountability provisions that are tied to post-graduation earnings. Next, I have a chart showing some of the details about the different changes as it relates to pre-OB3 and post-OB3. As I said before, OB3 introduces structural changes across Pell, direct loans, repayment, and accountability. First, Pell. Beginning July 1, 2026, students may lose Pell eligibility if non-federal grant aid equals or exceeds cost of attendance. That alters traditional packaging flexibility and requires institutions to reassess how their institutional aid is layered. In the recent FSA webinar, it was stated that if a non-federal aid is even $1 less than cost of attendance, the student will qualify for full Pell. Currently, there's nothing in place with the federal student aid to adjust Pell down, depending on how much of the non-federal grant aid is below cost of attendance. So we were all a little surprised by that. Second, enrollment intensity now directly affects annual loan eligibility. Students enrolled less than full-time will see prorated loan limits. Loan access becomes enrollment sensitive in a way it has not been before. Graduate borrowing shifts significantly with the elimination of Grad PLUS for new borrowers. Federal lending is no longer an uncapped mechanism up to the cost of attendance. Defined caps now serve as real ceilings for graduate and professional students. Parent Plus, it's similarly capped at $20,000 per academic year and $65,000 aggregate per dependent student. Federal loans can no longer be assumed to bridge the entire funding gap. On the repayment side, OB3 streamlines available options and standardizes elements of income-driven repayment, narrowing flexibility while increasing predictability. As we've heard, there will be only two options for repayment, after July 1st, 2026 for new borrowers. You may have heard that's the standard payment plan, standard spread over the period of time, 10 years typically, or the RAP program, which is income-based. At the same time, Workforce Pell expands eligibility to certain short-term workforce-aligned programs, introducing both opportunity and also oversight. Finally, accountability shifts towards post-graduation earnings benchmarks. Programs must demonstrate that outcomes justify borrowing levels, reinforcing a move toward a return on investment oversight. Taken together, OB3 transitions federal aid from an access expansion model to a capped outcome accountable framework. Next, Nan is going to introduce us to why policy changes break operations before they break systems.
Thank you, Karen. A set of rules have been set down from on high, so to speak, and you must now interpret those rules and see how it applies to your everyday operations. While the government says that this is all effective on July 1st, 2026, we have to start planning for those changes ahead of time. What are some of the workarounds? What are some of the manual controls that are going to have to be put into place? And this seems very ambiguous, but let's drill down just a little bit on some of the conversations that we may need to introduce. We have to look at things like LOA. We have to look at enrollment continuity. We have to take a look at our students changing from our programs and how our LOA policies may actually affect the students when they're leaving or even when they're coming back. This gets a little complicated, right? And it needs to be examined at an operational level. It's something that you have to start looking at on your daily progress, what's currently in place, how you currently operate on an everyday basis before any system, even CORE, can help you with that. So CORE is going to take care of a lot of different mechanics. And when I say a lot, quite a bit. But you also have to look at what this actually means for your different cohorts, for your programs that extend past 3 years, and even for your brand new students that you've already had conversations with prior to their enrollment, now coming in for that July 1st start. So Karen's going to dig a little bit deeper, and then I'll pop back in and tell you how CORE is going to help. Karen?
Yes, thank you. So where does the statute set rules? There's new rules related to the elimination of Grad PLUS loans, the change in graduate unsubsidized and Parent PLUS annual limits, and borrowing limits, just to name a few. Items effective upon enactment primarily relate to repayment plans. So the items that were effective immediately on July 4th, 2025, relate primarily to repayment plans, consolidation of loans, the borrower's defense regulations, and closed school loan discharge regulations. From operations to admissions to future projected revenue, there are now something that must be looked at and interpreted for your school, taking into account your current student population and those prospective students starting after July 1st, 2026. For current students, it means funding estimates, also known as award letters, created for an academic year that started before July 1, 2026, will likely need to be reviewed and modified if the academic year goes beyond July 1, 2026. For example, new Parent PLUS loan limits may no longer cover the gap. So Nan, now tell us more about how the financial aid software CORE can help.
So what we've gone ahead and done and addressed in CORE is we are now revising and testing the automated packaging algorithm to identify accurately those loan limits that apply to your affected student population. CORE is assessing the population and running it against the newly implemented grandfather logic so that student eligibility is based on packaging and graduation dates and assessing the program completion to verify, one, if the program extends past that 3-year limit as of the start date of July 1st, and how that will be affecting the students that are in that is already packaged, or for students that are going forward. Based on the OB3 regulations, we're also putting in at the enrollment level the ability to assess the transition in the enrollment. One, if the student is coming from an LOA, if they're being withdrawn from a program, if they're transferring over to a different program, that all can affect that student's eligibility for grandfathering, or how the legacy is the word that's used for OB3. Grandfathering is the term that we've all coined for it. So how that may change the student's ability to get prior loan eligibility, as opposed to when it thrusts them into the now OB3 regulations. We have created notifications and ways and cues of assessing that population, not only at the origination, but also as they continue throughout the program. So all of this is in the works and will be displayed. We're going to go ahead and turn this over to Armando.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Nan. So OB3 can change who can get Pell and federal loans, how much students and parents can borrow, how loans are repaid, and when programs can potentially lose federal loan eligibility. An important operational pivot is the legacy rule, or as we're saying, grandfathering. If you're in Miami, it's the abuelo rule, right? So it's that thing that determines whether old rules or new rules apply to an individual borrower. Let's take a look at the chart. Reading from left to right, the second and third columns, you can see the headers start with the word before. That disbursement before 7/1/2026 proves the loan existed before the law changed. Even a small disbursement will do. Now, let's take a look at the fourth and fifth columns. Significant differences, right? General graduate programs, aggregate loan limits are capped. Professional programs are capped. Graduate loans, Grad PLUS loans will be phased out. That's why it will be critical to review your defined enrollment history. It proves the student didn't interrupt or change the program that loan covered. So, first disbursement equals your loan trigger. Enrollment history equals your proof of continuing progress. Grandfathering, or that legacy rule, depends on two things. One, if a direct loan was first disbursed on or before June 30th, 2026, and two, the student remains enrolled in the same program at the same school, of course, with any approved LOAs. If both are true, the borrower can keep the older limits for the lesser of 3 academic years or remaining time to credential. If either fails, legacy protection ends. Bottom line, one disbursement plus one continuous enrollment staying in that same program equals temporary protection. Everything else flows from verifying those two facts. Pell Plus is pretty much triggered the same way, and we'll discuss that momentarily. Most major changes take effect July 1st, 2026. Now let's look at how borrowing meets cost of attendance.
Very good, thank you. So this slide reflects what I would characterize as the most immediate shift families will experience under OB3. Federal aid can no longer be assumed to cover the total cost of attendance. Historically, between direct loans, Parent Plus, and in some cases, Grad PLUS, families often treated federal lending as a way to bridge the gap. That assumption is no longer valid. Beginning July 1st, 2026, new Parent Plus cap limits, as Armando just said, are $20,000 annually, and that's a academic year, and $65,000 in the aggregate per dependent student across all parents combined. This represents a structural constraint where previously there was effectively none. Institutions that serve populations with high Parent Plus utilization will feel this change quickly. At the same time, Pell eligibility shifted in a way that may surprise both students and institutions. Starting July 1st, 2026, students may lose Pell eligibility if non-federal grants, including institutional and state aid, equal or exceed the cost of attendance. This alters traditional packaging strategies, particularly at institutions that front load the institutional grant aid to meet need. In addition, loan eligibility reductions tied to less than full-time enrollment add another layer of complexity. Enrollment intensity will now have more pronounced borrowing implications, which will require clearer advising and potentially closer coordination between financial aid and the academic advising units. Collectively, these provisions create what I call a new reality check. Aid offices will increasingly need to counsel families that federal borrowing is capped in ways it has not been before. Gift aid interactions with Pell are more restrictive, and enrollment decisions directly affect borrowing capacity. The practical implication for institutions is clear. Gap funding strategies must be developed now. That may include expanded payment plans, private loan counseling, institutional loan programs, revised scholarship strategies, or philanthropic bridge funding. This is not simply a compliance issue. It is an affordability and enrollment management issue. If institutions do not proactively design gap funding pathways, families will experience the funding shortfall at the billing stage rather than in the planning stage. And that timing matters significantly when you're talking about persistence in student enrollment and yield. Now, Nan will give us some examples of borrowing limits.
Okay, so let's paint a picture for you. A student attending your institution has a cost of attendance per year of $50,000, and the 4 years for the program is $200,000. Now, if it was prior to OB3, the student federal aid plus the grants covering $25,000, and the parents would be able to borrow the remaining $25,000 through PLUS. What would they need to do? It would cover everything up to the full cost of attendance minus aid. There was no annual or aggregate cap. It was based on credits. Multiple parents could borrow. Effectively, as Karen was saying before, there was no ceiling, and it was unlimited gap funding and financing. Now, you only can borrow up to $20,000. Both of your parents would have been able to borrow before, but now both mom, dad, uncle, whomever else is helping you out, can only go up to $20,000. Each person can't get $20,000. It's $20,000 between the individuals who are borrowing on your behalf. If you had a need of $100,000 to complete, or you had a gap of $100,000, your aggregate limit now is $65,000. So that means, as Karen stated before, earlier conversations, when we identify those types of programs coming from admissions to financial aid, that means having different and more intricate relationships with your academic advising to identify students who may run that risk and partnering with them and finding out just institutional wise, how are we going to help our student population to bridge that gap now that pretty much unlimited borrowing is no longer available to them.
Let's turn to some pressure points that commonly break and the assessments that prevent that from happening. There's just one song that comes to my mind when I see this slide, and I don't know about you, but I'm a fan. David Bowie, Freddie Mercury, shout out to Under Pressure. That should be the anthem song for identifying pressure points. I'm not going to sing. You'll have to tune in another time for that. I recently attended a webinar, and one of the presenters said, "We're in a hurry up and wait period." And she couldn't have said it better. Right now, we're hurrying up right now. We're trying to understand everything. We're trying to read all the information that's out there, what's concrete, what isn't. And we're also in that wait period, waiting to see what Department of Ed does, waiting to see when all the rules are finalized. So we'll take a look at the first bullet. Ensure that you know when the student's grandfather period ends. Can you just imagine having to calculate all this information? Students, large populations, small populations, it takes a lot. So that's pretty crazy to me. But the Department of Ed, they expect that all this gets done.
It's a good thing Core's going to do that for you. It's a good
Yeah.
thing.
And no matter what your program structure is, our core system will be tracking the grandfathering end date for you. Let's take a look at the second bullet point. Don't focus on the award year. Award year thinking will cause mistakes. Think student timeline, not academic year labels. Grandfathering is tied to the student's original borrowing timing, not the award year label. Here's an example. Student starts April 2026. Loans are originated out of the 26-27 year, paid on April 15th, the student is grandfathered. If the school, anchors to award year thinking, you will miscalculate eligibility. Confirm continuous enrollment history. Once a student withdraws, drops, right? Continuous enrollment breaks, grandfathering ends. Systems should automatically track this, right? So what must schools define internally? What counts as continuous enrollment? How do LOAs impact grandfathering status? What do institutional policies say regarding LOAs and the point of withdrawal? You most definitely want to review, update institutional policies and procedures applicable to support the changes introduced by OB3. Most important thing, in my opinion, is cross-functional team communication. Nan mentioned it just previously. Agree who owns each assessment. Let's go ahead and take a look at proration changes.
Thank you, Armando. And this is about enrollment intensity. And enrollment intensity used to mostly matter for Pell. We talked about that a little earlier. Two things that need to be clarified immediately, though. This enrollment intensity rule does not only apply to undergraduate loans. It also directly impacts undergraduate and professional loan eligibility. So it's all levels, undergraduate, graduate, professional. It impacts clock hours programs and credit hour programs. However, non-term programs would typically not be included because those programs already calculate loan eligibility on a progression-based model. The real issue schools will face is enrollment changes constantly. Students they add classes, drop classes, swap sections. You cannot manually chase every moment. So before OB3, loans were typically packaged at the annual limit. Enrollment intensity did not proportionally reduce loans the way Pell did. Now, if the student is enrolled less than half time, their annual loan limit must be prorated proportionally. And that schools are at a liberty to determine what is full-time for their school. And that is something that we definitely think every school should be looking at, whether 12 credits should be considered full-time. A lot of schools at the graduate professional limit level use 12 credits, 9 credits for grad school and doctoral school. So that is something that will need to be determined by the institution. All of this applies beginning the 26-27 loans. So now will you discuss how the core system will support these changes?
Sure, Karen. As she said before, monitoring all of those swaps, drops, changes in the enrollment status, and having to do that for every cohort, every student, every program is something that's just untenable. So CORE will help alleviate that situation altogether because we built automation so that all your enrollment shifts will not have to be a manually monitored process. We're going to continuously evaluate the enrollment changes against loan eligibility. So whether your students are in your add drop period or whether your students decide to change midstream, going from 12 credits to 9 or 7, those enrollment thresholds are already built into CORE, and the automation will now assess that against the entire scheduled units, and it will determine whether or not your loans need to be adjusted, reassessed, or left alone altogether. There's no guesswork. The students who need adjustment will be presented to the user. We are going to introduce different ways of flagging those students that require your attention. And it's going to look at that student also at the origination as well as the disbursement level, which is, of course, outlined in the OB3 regulations.
All right, let's talk about your direct questions. Mark, if you'll change
There we go.
there, thank you. So we did hear a lot of your questions on your registration forms, and we really appreciate that. Many were similar, and here's a direct answer to some of those questions. We will, as Mark said earlier, be following up with a more comprehensive list of your questions. So let's first talk about revised repayment counseling and borrower communications. Beginning July 1st, 2026, new borrowers have only 2 repayment options. All loans must be repaid under the same plan. Offices must ensure counseling materials reflect these statutory changes and the borrowers understand plan limitations and deadlines. Now, this is for new borrowers. For existing students who were in the system prior to July 1, they will have until 2028 to continue staying on the plan they're on if they graduate between then and 2028. After that, if they still have open loans to be repaid, they'll have to revert to one of the 2 available plans. So establishing institutional accountability monitoring. Programs that fail the new low earnings outcome measure 2 out of 3 years will lose Title IV direct loan eligibility. Schools are required to provide student warnings when programs fail. And this is an institutional risk, a management issue, not just a financial aid issue. This is something that really needs to be looked at. Next is update policy and procedure manuals. You need to document new loan limits and awarding rules. You need to document proration methodology, legacy borrower tracking, and institutional loan limit decisions if you decide to do that. Some schools will decide to have loan limits that are different than what is allowed by the federal student aid program. That is a choice for each school to decide. And if so, you just need to document that for your students. You also need to update your consumer disclosures and your student-facing communications. Remember, there's all of these disclosures that you're required to put not only on your website, but also for students on their portal so that they have seen these consumer disclosures. So you want to revise repayment counseling and borrower communications. And this is a serious situation here. And one thing I wanted to mention is at Portico, we offer assistance to schools to work on their policies and procedures and assist with any kind of regulatory compliance questions. So feel free to reach out to your account manager. So now I'm going to ask Nan, will you give us more information about what must be done?
So I'll talk to you from the core side. We've gone ahead and updated the enforceable loan limits for all categories. We've also gone ahead and differentiated from our previous grad and doctorate programs to identify in the system what is now categorized as a professional degree, and all the limits that are associated with that has propagated throughout the system. We want to make sure that everyone is aware that loan eligibility is now based on intensity. Before, there was just a need analysis that was done for Pell. Now it's also going to be done for loans, and you need to understand with the movement of your students that there will be a need to assess those students throughout. So that's a new function and process that you will have to have either a team or just members of your staff be aware of that. Then once, even though the system's going to do it for you and identify it for you, you may need to put in or break up your staff to be able to support the identified students and work those students accordingly. So I'm going to touch on a little bit later also the ability to set up in core your institutional loan limit decisions and the fact that we're going to support that within the system So it is not a manual process that you'll have to just write down, but can actually configure within the system. But I'll turn it over to you again, Karen, to talk about what schools can stabilize now.
Okay, thank you. While much of OB3, as we've said many times, becomes effective July 1st of 26, there are concrete steps that institutions can use to stabilize the situation now, even before final guidance is issued. So the first thing you want to do is define your July 1st identification strategy. What this means is you need a clear method for identifying which students are subject to the new rules beginning July 1st. That includes determining borrower cohort distinctions, clarifying how crossover periods will be handled, and documenting internal definitions of new borrower where applicable. Ambiguity at the identification stage creates total compliance risk later. You want to update awarding assumptions. Many current packaging models assume access to full annual loan limits, availability of Grad PLUS or Parent PLUS as a gap filling mechanism. Those assumptions must now be recalibrated. Institutions should model reduced borrowing capacity, Pell interaction changes, and enrollment intensity prorations. Awarding logic should reflect the post-OB3 framework before the first affected cohort arrives. Be prepared. Next, build a manual loan proration checkpoint. Until system automation is fully aligned, institutions should consider building a manual verification step. This ensures loan limits reflect enrollment intensity, midterm enrollment changes trigger recalculation, and over awards are avoided. Even a temporary manual checkpoint reduces exposure during this transition period. Next, create clear counseling scripts. Students and families will experience funding gaps they did not anticipate. Frontline staff in admissions and financial aid need clear explanations of the new loan caps. Scripts may be explaining enrollment intensity reductions so that everyone is using the same information on the team, and messaging around Pell interaction changes. Consistency in communication will reduce confusion and escalation for problems later. Next, monitor aggregate exposure early. Particularly for Graduate Parent Plus borrowers, aggregate limits will now bind more quickly. Institutions should run reports identifying students nearing the aggregate thresholds, flag your at-risk population, and proactively counsel affected students. Waiting until disbursement and denial creates unnecessary disruption and likely withdrawals from your programs. So you want to also document interpretation decisions. In areas where Department of Ed guidance is still pending, institutions will have to make good faith interpretive decisions. Those decisions should be documented, should be reviewed through governance channels, and consistently applied across the board with all students. Documentation protects institutions during audits and program reviews. And last, coordinate with business office and admissions. These changes extend well beyond financial aid. Business offices need visibility into payment plan demands, expected funding gaps. The admissions team needs accurate messaging for prospective students and revised financial aid award assumptions. OBBBA, OB3 implementation should not solely be within the financial aid office. It requires, as Nan said earlier, and Armando, cross-functional alignment. So you might conclude that the institutions that stabilize early will not be those who wait for the perfect clarity, but those who build structured, documented, cross-functional preparation now. Next, Nan will speak to how our financial aid software, again, supports OB3.
Yes. So grandfathering and legacy bill tracking, Core will track the grandfather end dates for you so you do not have to. Institutional loan limit controls will be available. Pell eligibility updates, based on external funding, scholarships and grants is also going to be available within core, that it will, of course, eliminate any form of compliance risk through for OB3. Graduate and professional classifications are there and tied to all the loan limits, as well as how you operationally attribute what is a professional degree for your, I want to say for your psychology programs, as well as your theology programs. That will be supported in core as well. Enrollment-based loan proration and professional loan limit alignments have all been and continue to be updated within core and will be available for you to view at Momentum. Policy will change, but your operational stability does not have to. With Portico's financial aid core software, it is manageable. And because core is built to support you through it, we know it's the anxiety and everything else that comes with change can be a lot, but the software is going to be here as well as our team to help you every step of the way. And I'll turn it over to you now, Mark.
Great, thank you. All right, so just a reminder that we have developed a resource hub that we'll be adding information to, adding articles, tips, guides in the next few weeks and next couple of months. Keep an eye out for that. And you could always reach out to us. Reach out to your account manager, reach out to our support teams, and we're always here to help. And we're all learning together at the same time. Portico offers financial aid software as a standalone option. We also have full service teams. You can work with Karen, you can work with Armando, you can work with our teams directly. So you see some of our professional services that we offer here, as well as different softwares and tools. But stay tuned, reach out to us, and absolutely we'll be continuing this conversation in the weeks to come. So thank you so much, everybody. We'll follow up on some of your questions asynchronously. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.